the worst and most dangerous of errors hitherto has been Plato's invention of pure spirit and the good in itself.
What a way to open, wouldn't you say? This bold declaration, right from Nietzsche's Preface to Beyond Good and Evil, doesn't just whisper its intentions, it shouts them. It immediately, and I mean immediately, targets Platonism. Not just any error, mind you, but the most pernicious dogmatic error. This isn't just a philosophical disagreement, it's a declaration of war. It reveals Nietzsche's profound intent to dismantle not just any philosophical system, but one he sees as the very bedrock of Western thought, and, crucially, the source of its deepest maladies. So, we have to ask, why? Why is this invention of pure spirit and the good in itself deemed so incredibly dangerous? Answering that will set the stage for his entire critique, for everything that follows. By scrutinizing Nietzsche's explosive charge against Plato, we're not just digging into ancient history. No, we'll uncover his radical revaluation of truth itself, and what he calls the fundamental conditions of life. This, in turn, offers us powerful tools to question our own inherited philosophical assumptions. And believe me, this exploration matters. It matters deeply. Why? Because it challenges us, even today, to rethink the very basis of Western thought, to ask what it truly means to philosophize authentically, especially now, in what many consider a post-dogmatic age. So, today we dive headfirst into the preface of Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. Think of this text as a fiery overture, a dramatic opening to his mature philosophy. Penned in 1885, it confronts dogmatism head-on, and Platonism is its prime example. It's Exhibit A, and it's here he introduces the free spirit, this fascinating figure who operates beyond the confines of traditional values. Our journey today will first unpack Nietzsche's provocative opening metaphors, those images that grab you by the collar, and his initial, blistering assault on dogmatic philosophers. Then, we'll examine his deconstruction of philosophical foundations, really zeroing in on that explosive charge against Plato. And finally, we'll explore the tension of soul Nietzsche describes, a concept that's absolutely crucial, and his clarion call to a new kind of philosopher. All of this, you see, sets the stage for understanding his entire monumental project in the book. Nietzsche, never one for a quiet entrance, opens with a now famous and yes, somewhat notorious provocation. Listen to this.
Supposing that truth is a woman, what then?
And he doesn't stop there. He immediately follows this with a suspicion, a pointed question.
Is there not ground for suspecting that all philosophers, insofar as they have been dogmatists, have failed to understand women, that the terrible seriousness and clumsy importunity with which they have usually paid their addresses to truth have been unskilled and unseemly methods for winning a woman?
Suddenly, truth isn't some abstract concept. It's personified, elusive, perhaps even resistant to the fumbling, heavy-handed approach of the traditional philosopher. The key concepts leaping out at us are, of course, truth, now painted in this rather startling metaphorical light, and dogmatism, which he skewers for its terrible seriousness and clumsy importunity. Make no mistake, Nietzsche is immediately launching a critique of philosophical method. It's not just what philosophers have sought, but how they've sought it. A crucial distinction. Now, let's be frank. This gendered metaphor is, from our contemporary standpoint, problematic. And here we encounter our first significant interpretive tension. While some scholars argue a as the content analysis rightly notes, that the metaphor primarily highlights truth's elusiveness and the sheer inadequacy of rigid, unyielding epistemological methods, pointing to Nietzsche's emphasis on the philosopher's failed approach rather than on women themselves. The explicit phrasing,
failed to understand women,
makes it exceedingly difficult, doesn't it, to entirely disconnect it from 19th century gendered connotations, especially when we view it alongside some of his other, shall we say, challenging writings on the topic. Feminist philosophy, for instance, offers robust and vital critiques of such language, questioning whether it inevitably casts truth as a passive object to be won, or as an inherently fickle entity defined by limiting gendered stereotypes. Our scholarly task, then, involves navigating this very tension, acknowledging its historical context and its problematic nature, while still dissecting its philosophical function. And in this case, that function is a searing critique of the dogmatist's method. This leads us directly to a crucial point about how we engage with such texts, how we must engage with them. This is a methodological insight essential for reading Nietzsche, and indeed, much of philosophy. When a philosopher like Nietzsche employs a potent, charged image such as truth as a woman, we absolutely must ask, what philosophical work is this metaphor doing? What dimensions of truth, or of the philosophical pursuit itself, does it illuminate, or perhaps startle into view, that a dry, literal statement might obscure? And, critically, what are its inherent limitations, its potential biases, its points of conceptual strain? Philosophers, you see, don't merely deploy logic. Their creative use of language, especially metaphor, can reveal underlying assumptions, open new vistas of thought, or, as we see here, serve a powerful polemical purpose. But, and this is key, these linguistic tools must be analyzed with the same critical rigor we apply to formal arguments. Consider for a moment, what does this specific opening metaphor immediately signal about Nietzsche's own philosophical style, and his disruptive, earth-shaking intentions for this very book? He continues, pressing his critique of dogmatism relentlessly.
Certainly she has never allowed herself to be won, and at present every kind of dogma stands with sad and discouraged mien, if indeed it stands at all. For there are scoffers who maintain that it has fallen, that all dogma lies on the ground, nay more, that it is at its last gasp.
The failure of dogmatism, he declares, is patent, obvious. But Nietzsche, ever the philosophical archaeologist, wants to dig deeper. He wants to question the very ground upon which these imposing dogmatic systems were built. He speculates, almost musing aloud.
What has actually sufficed for the basis of such imposing and absolute philosophical edifices as the dogmatists have hitherto reared? Perhaps some popular superstition of immemorial time, such as the soul-superstition, which, in the form of subject and ego superstition, has not yet ceased doing mischief. Perhaps some play upon words, a deception on the part of grammar, or an audacious generalization of very restricted, very personal, very human, all too human facts.
And here, Nietzsche masterfully introduces key themes that will echo and resonate throughout his entire body of work. We see the critique of superstition, particularly the soul superstition and the ego superstition, ideas he sees as deeply problematic. We see the critique of language and grammar as potential insidious sources of philosophical deception. Think about that. And, of course, the critique of universalizing from very personal, very human, all too human facts. He's employing a sharp skepticism, a form of proto-genealogy, tracing these supposedly grand, timeless claims of philosophy back to rather humble, even questionable, origins. How might grammar deceive us, philosophically speaking? It's a profound question. How does a personal bias, an all-too-human fact, become enshrined, almost sanctified, as an absolute dogma? These are the uncomfortable, challenging questions Nietzsche forces us to confront. This method of critique, this relentless examination of the often unacknowledged, flimsy foundations of supposedly absolute systems, is absolutely central to his project. His implicit standard? It's one of fierce intellectual honesty and a profound, almost visceral suspicion of anything claiming timeless, universal status. Critique here is not mere negativity, not just tearing down for the sake of it. No, it's a rigorous unmasking, aimed at clearing the ground for something new. Nietzsche then refines his critique, drawing a fascinating comparison. He likens dogmatic philosophy to a kind of precursor science.
The philosophy of the dogmatists, it is to be hoped, was only a promise for thousands of years afterwards, as was astrology in still earlier times.
He notes that, much like astrology, immense effort, incredible intellectual energy was poured into these systems. He continues, painting a vivid picture.
It seems that in order to inscribe themselves upon the heart of humanity with everlasting claims, all great things have first to wander about the earth as enormous and awe-inspiring caricatures. Dogmatic philosophy has been a caricature of this kind, for instance, the Vedanta doctrine in Asia and Platonism in Europe.
The analogy to astrology is incredibly telling, isn't it? Astrology was grand, influential, pervasive, and ultimately superseded. Dogmatism, then, wasn't entirely useless in Nietzsche's view. It was perhaps a necessary, if distorted, preliminary stage. And significantly, he names his targets, loud and clear: Vedanta in Asia, and crucially for his European audience, Platonism. This brings us then to the very heart of his critique in this preface. He acknowledges a certain debt, perhaps, a grudging respect for the struggle itself.
Let us not be ungrateful to it, although it must certainly be confessed that the worst, the most tiresome, and the most dangerous of errors, hitherto, has been a dogmatist error, namely, Plato's invention of pure spirit and the good in itself.
Boom. This is a direct hit. A bullseye. Platonism for Nietzsche isn't just an error among many. It's the worst, most tiresome, and most dangerous of all dogmatic errors. But why? Why this singular condemnation? Because, he argues, and this is absolutely critical,
it amounted to the very inversion of truth and the denial of the perspective, the fundamental condition of life, to speak of spirit and the good as Plato spoke of them.
Here, the concept of perspective, capitalized by Nietzsche himself for emphasis, you'll notice, emerges as utterly fundamental. Platonism, by positing a realm of pure spirit and an absolute good, separate from and inherently superior to the world of becoming, of appearance, of our lived experience, denies this perspectival nature of life and truth. It inverts value, placing truth in some distant, transcendent realm, rather than in the immanent, messy, vibrant world we actually inhabit. Nietzsche even frames this as a kind of illness, a malady, asking, almost like a physician diagnosing a patient,
how did such a malady attack that finest product of antiquity, Plato? Had the wicked Socrates really corrupted him? Was Socrates, after all, a corrupter of youths, and deserved his hemlock?
This confrontation with Plato is, of course, a cornerstone of Nietzsche's thought, initiating a conceptual connection that is absolutely vital to understanding his entire philosophical project. Nietzsche's battle, you see, is not merely with Plato the historical figure, but with Platonism as a pervasive, enduring philosophical tendency. The dualism of worlds, the realm of forms versus the world of appearances, the consequent devaluation of sensory experience, and the positing of a timeless, absolute truth and good. Grasping this profound antagonism, understanding why Nietzsche perceives Plato's invention as uniquely perilous due to its alleged inversion of truth and its denial of perspective, is absolutely key to unlocking the subsequent arguments in Beyond Good and Evil. It's the master key in many ways. And here, it's worth a moment of scholarly humility, unpacking the full depth of Nietzsche's charge against Plato, and indeed, Plato's own intricate, multifaceted philosophy, is a monumental task. It's one that has occupied scholars for generations, and rightly so. The danger Nietzsche identifies in Platonism is complex, touching upon epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and even aesthetics. We, as a scholarly community, continue to grapple with the nuances of this foundational philosophical clash, recognizing the profound complexities involved in interpreting both these colossal thinkers and their enduring, often challenging, legacies. At this point, Nietzsche has laid out his primary diagnosis of this past era. He's identified dogmatism as the core problem, traced its often flimsy foundations, and pinpointed Platonism as its most pernicious, most dangerous form, primarily because it denies the perspectival condition of life itself. This then sets the stage perfectly for what comes next, exploring the consequences of this monumental error, and crucially, the possibility of moving beyond it. Now, Nietzsche claims this error, this Platonic nightmare, as he calls it, has largely been overcome, at least in principle. Listen to this.
But now when it has been surmounted, when Europe, rid of this nightmare, can again draw breath freely and at least enjoy a healthier sleep, we, whose duty is wakefulness itself, are the heirs of all the strength which the struggle against this error has fostered.
Notice that we, a select group, isn't it, whose very duty is wakefulness. And this long, arduous struggle, he argues, has had a profound, transformative effect.
But the struggle against Plato, or, to speak plainer, and for the people, the struggle against the ecclesiastical oppression of millennia of Christianity, produced in Europe a magnificent tension of soul, such as had not existed anywhere previously.
This assertion,
for Christianity is Platonism for the people,
is a crucial and famously provocative Nietzschean thesis, and it offers us an opportunity for a brief historiographical context interrupt. The equation of Christianity with a kind of popularized or vulgarized Platonism is one of Nietzsche's most debated and influential claims. Scholarly reception, as you might imagine, has been complex and varied. Some historians of philosophy and theology have meticulously explored the intricate ways in which Platonic and Neoplatonic thought undeniably shaped early Christian doctrine, particularly regarding concepts like the soul, transcendence, and the nature of the divine. Others, however, have emphasized the distinctiveness of Christian theology, arguing that Nietzsche's formulation is perhaps an oversimplification, deployed for powerful polemical effect. Interpretive schools continue to debate the precise nature and extent of this Platonic influence on Christianity, and, just as importantly, how Nietzsche's specific understanding of it shapes his overarching critique of Western culture. It's a live debate. This claim also showcases a key element of Nietzsche's entire approach. Here we see another crucial methodological insight: Nietzsche's use of what can be termed, and what scholars often call, proto-genealogy. When he links Christianity to Platonism, or earlier, when he suggests that dogmatism arises from popular superstition, or a deception on the part of grammar, he is not merely describing, he is performing an unmasking, a revelation. He traces the lineage, the pedigree, of revered ideas or institutions back to origins he deems less noble, more contingent, more historically constructed than their proponents would have us believe. The philosophical work of this method is profound. It's to challenge the perceived authority, the seeming naturalness, or the assumed purity of these concepts, by revealing their descent, their often messy and all too human origins. And by doing so, he opens them up to critical re-evaluation. Understanding this genealogical impulse, this drive to excavate and expose, is absolutely key to grasping why Nietzsche delves so deeply into the historical conditions of philosophical and moral ideas. The result of this millennia-long struggle against Platonism, or Platonism as Christianity, according to Nietzsche, is this magnificent tension of soul. This tension, it's a pivotal concept. He continues, and the imagery is striking.
With such a tensely strained bow, one can now aim at the furthest goals.
However, this tension is not necessarily comfortable. Far from it.
As a matter of fact, the European feels this tension as a state of distress, and twice attempts have been made in grand style to unbend the bow. Once by means of Jesuitism, and the second time by means of democratic enlightenment.
These attempts, Jesuitism, perhaps representing a disciplined, dogmatic religious reaction, a return to old certainties, and democratic enlightenment, perhaps representing a leveling, rationalistic, and ultimately comfort-seeking secularism, are, in Nietzsche's critical view, efforts to escape this productive, albeit challenging, tension. They are attempts to slacken the bow. This brings us to a fascinating conceptual connection with broader discussions of the Enlightenment and modernity. Nietzsche is engaging critically, deeply critically, with the legacy of the Enlightenment. While he undoubtedly values certain aspects of its critical reason, its willingness to question, he is profoundly skeptical of what he sees as the naive optimism of democratic enlightenment. He questions its often uncritical belief in automatic progress, and its tendency towards what he would later call a herd morality, a morality that prioritizes comfort and security above all else, thereby seeking to unbend the bow of spiritual tension, to dissipate that stored energy. His critique here anticipates, with remarkable prescience, later concerns about mass culture and the potential for modern societal structures to stifle profound, individual, or spiritual striving, to deaden the soul, if you will. He connects this latter attempt to unbend the bow to liberty of the press and newspaper reading, which, he sardonically suggests, might bring it about that the spirit would not so easily find itself in distress. There's a clear, sharp critique here of modern mass society's tendency towards ease, towards superficiality, and the consequent dissipation of that vital spiritual energy. He even throws in a typically dense, perhaps ironic, jab.
The Germans invented gunpowder, all credit to them, but they again made things square. They invented printing.
A wonderfully Nietzschean observation, contrasting disruptive explosive potential with what he sees as the possible leveling, domesticating effects of mass communication. But then comes the crucial self-identification, the moment where he defines his own camp.
But we, who are neither Jesuits, nor Democrats, nor even sufficiently Germans, we good Europeans and free, very free spirits, we have it still, all the distress of spirit and all the tension of its bow.
And there it is. The we is defined. The good Europeans, the free, very free spirits. They are distinct from these other movements, these other attempts to escape. They retain the tension, they embrace the distress. This tension of soul, initially felt as distress, is now reframed. It's not merely suffering, it's the tension of its bow, implying stored energy, immense potential force the capacity for great flight. These free spirits are absolutely central to the project of Beyond Good and Evil. They are its heroes, its protagonists. And here we hit another fascinating interpretive tension within Nietzsche scholarship, this time regarding this very tension of soul. Is it primarily, as some scholars argue, a state of profound suffering and nihilistic despair that arises from the collapse of traditional metaphysical and religious frameworks? The death of God, reverberating through the European soul. In this view, the free spirits merely endure this distress, or perhaps heroically navigate its treacherous waters. After all, Nietzsche does state, quite clearly, quote,
"The European feels this tension as a state of distress."
However, the powerful, evocative metaphor of the tensely strained bow, and his immediate, defiant assertion that we have it still, strongly suggest that Nietzsche views this tension not just as pain, but as a reservoir of potential energy, a precondition for aiming at furthest goals. The complexity, then, lies in this dual aspect. The distress is undeniably real, a palpable suffering. Yet for the free spirit, it is transformable into, or at least coexists with, profound strength and immense creative capacity. It's not either or, it's both and. This seems an opportune moment for a point of contemporary relevance. Think about this. Nietzsche identifies Jesuitism and democratic enlightenment as historical attempts to unbend the bow, to alleviate this profound spiritual or existential tension. If we were to apply his critical lens to our world today, what contemporary cultural, intellectual, or even technological trends might Nietzsche perceive as analogous efforts to reduce or eliminate such tension? Perhaps certain forms of therapeutic culture that prioritize comfort and the avoidance of distress above all else? Or the echo chambers of social media that reinforce ideological certitude, shielding us from challenging perspectives? Or even the sheer velocity and constant distraction of our digital lives, leaving little room for deep reflection or the cultivation of inner tension? And, crucially, what, from a Nietzschean perspective, might be irretrievably lost if this generative tension is too successfully unbent or tranquilized? What price do we pay for ease? This brings us to the very end of the preface, a forward-looking, almost breathless conclusion. It's filled with anticipation.
And perhaps also the arrow, the duty, and, who knows, the goal to aim at.
The free spirits, having retained that tension of its bow, also possess the arrow, the means, the capacity, the sharpened will. They possess the duty, the task, the responsibility, the imperative, and potentially, tantalizingly, the goal to aim at. This points directly, unmistakably, to the exploratory, daring nature of the book that is to follow. What is this goal? Nietzsche leaves us hanging, eager for more. It's here, in this very ambiguity and promise, that we can see a clear conceptual connection to later philosophical movements. The ambiguity of the goal, the profound emphasis on future creation, on the forging of new values, the iconic figure of the free spirit navigating a world stripped of its old dogmas. These elements resonate powerfully with existentialism and post-structuralism. Think, for instance, of Sartre's radical freedom and the crushing weight of responsibility that comes with it. Or consider Foucault's incisive analyses of power and the constitution of the subject. Nietzsche's free spirit, tasked with forging values in a world post-death of God, serves as a crucial, indispensable precursor to many of their central concerns regarding truth, meaning, and human agency in a world without fixed metaphysical anchors. He paved a way. Finally, Nietzsche grounds this fiery, world-shattering preface in a specific, almost humble, time and place.
Sils Maria, Upper Engadine, June 1885.
This is more than just a dateline, more than a simple geographical marker. Sils Maria was a place of profound, almost mystical inspiration for Nietzsche. It was here he conceived of the eternal recurrence, one of his most challenging and enigmatic ideas. It was here he did much of his most important, most groundbreaking writing. Including this small detail adds a personal, almost intimate, touch to this otherwise grand, sweeping philosophical pronouncement. It reminds us of the man behind the ideas. So, today, we've navigated Nietzsche's fiery overture in the preface to Beyond Good and Evil. We've witnessed his audacious dismantling of dogmatism, particularly his excoriation of Plato's invention of pure spirit, which he decried as nothing less than an inversion of truth and a fundamental denial of life's perspectival essence. We explored the profound, complex tension of soul Nietzsche identified, not as a mere affliction, not as something to be simply cured or overcome, but as a tensely strained bow, a bow forged from the long, arduous struggle against Platonic Christian values, a bow that now empowers the emerging free spirits. This initial confrontation, employing potent critique and his signature proto-genealogy, has laid bare the philosophical battleground. It has hinted at the arduous, yes, but also exhilarating path of revaluation that lies ahead, a path of danger and discovery. And our exploration only deepens as we turn next to the very first section of Chapter 1, on the prejudices of philosophies. Here, Nietzsche immediately confronts philosophy's most sacred cow, the will to truth. He dares to ask the unthinkable, why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? Can you imagine a more radical question for a philosopher? We will grapple with this perilous question, a question likened to a riddle posed by a sphinx, which challenges the foundational assumptions of the entire Socratic Platonist tradition, and indeed, of Western thought itself. So, prepare yourselves. Prepare for an intellectually bracing encounter, as Nietzsche forces us, compels us, to consider the very value of truth, embarking on a risky, exhilarating inquiry that promises to reconfigure our understanding of what it truly means to philosophize. The journey continues.